Hey, I'm Logan Ryles, and today I want to talk to you about my new book, First Strike. Really excited about this one. It's the second installment in my Prosecution Force series, which you may remember from the first book in the series, and it follows the exploits of Reed Montgomery, my action hero, and all the things he does for the White House off the books to keep the free world free. It's a lot of fun. This book was it was a lot of fun to write, but it was a big challenge to write. And that's because in this book, Reed and his team infiltrate a country that is famous for being hostile, unfriendly, unwelcoming to people from the outside. And that, of course, is North Korea. So in addition to being the longest book, actually, I've ever published, this book was, it was a challenge because of the research. I can't go to North Korea, obviously. I don't want to go to North Korea. And so I had to lean heavily on some other resources to kind of get a picture of what life is like up there, and some of the cultural things that they have going on as a country that doesn't communicate with the outside world. It's a very different dynamic, and it was really hard to wrap my mind around. But once I did, the next challenge was, of course, to capture what I had learned in the story. And only you can be the judge of whether or not I achieved that. But it was a lot of fun to write, and now that it's been out about a week, I actually want to do something a little different that I normally don't do. And I want to read you the first chapter. I think it's a pretty fun chapter. Kind of kicks the story off with a bang. And of course, normally I leave this to the professionals. Shouts out to Gary Bennett and Kyle Tate, who have been bringing my books to life in audiobook, doing an amazing job. But today, we want to do something a little bit fun and read that too. Now, before I do, if you've not read Brink of War, which is of course the first book in the series, you don't have to. You can pick up First Strike, and if it the blurb sounds like something you'd be interested in, and the story's going to make complete sense. It's a complete story. Of course, there's subplots that carry over from book to book, but for the most part, it's just a complete story. However, if you do want to get an idea where Reed came from, what his background was, and how he came to be doing what he was doing, of course, you could check out Brink of War, and it'll fill you in on that. Let's dive right in. Let's get into this. So, Chapter 1, Gangwon Province, Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Gok Chen-ho could feel the cold in his bones, not just seeping in off the mountains and cutting through his threadbare coat, but also radiating from within, creeping out from his lungs and saturating his blood. It was a cold that transcended the early April frost and spoke of a much more chilling factor: fear. He left the car next to the pothole-infested highway and started into the trees on the lower half of the hillside. Frozen leaves crunched under his feet, and he clutched the folder to his side. Breath misted in front of him, and for a split second, his exhausted vision blurred and the shadows around him merged into a figure. A tall man in an olive drab uniform with a sneer on his lips and armed with an AKM rifle. Gok stopped, blinking hard and sucking down icy air. The figure vanished, just another illusion of his paranoid mind stretched to a perilous level of strain. He glanced sideways amid the trees and almost stepped back. He could make it to the car and return to the research facility northeast of Pyongyang within a couple hours. He could use his card key and a crafted excuse to slip past the ironclad security back into his research office. Before it was ever missed, he could return the file, lock the drawer, and hurry home. Then he could hold his wife and kiss his daughter on the head, forgetting any of this ever happened. But long before he cemented his intentions to back out, another thought came to mind. He saw the weapon again, gleaming under fluorescent lights, sleek, shiny, and even elegant. It was a masterpiece of unthinkable destructive capacity, a weapon to end the world. No, he couldn't go back. It was now or never. Gok pulled his coat closer around his stomach and crept forward, choosing a path between the fallen limbs and away from shallow trenches. A snow flurry drifted past his face, and he looked up to a full moon blazing down amid scattered clouds. He thought about Simju, his 20-year-old daughter. He thought about her future and her freedom. He thought about what would happen to her if he failed. And he pressed on. Another 100 meters into the steepening incline, Gok saw the gnarled camphor tree rising above the forest, its evergreen leaves collecting the gathering snowfall. The tree dominated the space like one of the Supreme Leader's intercontinental ballistic missiles. Its limbs swayed and rustled in the wind, but all else around it was silent. Gok stopped a few yards away, looking impulsively over his shoulder, then checked his watch. The American should have been there by now, waiting for him next to the landmark tree. Gok clutched the file folder to his stomach and huddled over, feeling the bite of the wind through the myriad of little holes in his threadbare coat. He risked a whisper into the forest. "John?" Gok wasn't sure if the name was real or not. The man who called himself John was Korean-American by birth, born to a Korean mother and an American Army officer during the 70s, or so he claimed. He looked more Korean than Western, which was probably why he could sneak through the restricted borders of the Hermit Kingdom without detection. But Gok believed John was from the West. He saw the boldness in his shoulders, symbolizing his fearless efforts to undermine the regime in Pyongyang. This man wasn't cowed by communist abuse. He breathed free air in America, and Gok longed to breathe the same. "John," Gok whispered again. No answer. Gok started around the tree, choosing his steps carefully. He'd met the American there twice before, once for an initial orientation to his duties, and the second time to report on the presence of the Supreme Leader's new weapon. John was interested in the new weapon, distressed by it, obviously. He wanted proof. He wanted details. He wanted anything and everything Gok could bring him, and in exchange, he was willing to help Gok and his family flee North Korea. It was the offer of a lifetime and the gamble of a millennium. Gok knew all too well what the consequences of failure could look like, but he also knew what the consequences of the new weapon could look like. And that second mental image was far worse. "John," Gok repeated one last time, raising his voice. "Chin-ho?" John used Gok's given name, appearing like an apparition out of the shadows 10 meters away. Gok froze, at once relieved and then instantly on guard again. Something was wrong. He could see it in John's strained features. The American's cheeks were pale, and he looked impulsively over his shoulder. "Did you bring it?" John hissed. Gok looked into the trees. He couldn't see anything except deepening shadows, but something in his spine began to tingle. "It's here," Gok said, still clutching the file. His English was weak, but he knew enough to get by. "Did you bring the soldiers?" John stepped forward, holding out his hand. Gok saw his lip twitch, and once again the American glanced over his shoulder. Gok stepped back. "What is wrong?" John snapped his fingers. "Give me the file." Then Gok heard a click in the distance, barely perceptible but deathly familiar to him. He recalled the sound perfectly from his years in the Korean People's Army, the snap of an AKM assault rifle, switching from safety to fire. John heard it too, and his face washed pale. "Run!" Gok didn't need a second warning. He turned and dashed back down the hill just as the AKM opened fire, joined almost instantly by the voices of 2 or 3 of its twins. Gok glanced back to see John hurl himself to one side, then fall to the ground amid a spray of blood, his face blown away by successive 30 caliber rounds. The icy fear Gok felt all night turned boiling hot, and he sprinted back to the highway. Bullets snapped through the limbs overhead, and he ducked low, his heart pounding and his lungs burning. The edge of the forest appeared just ahead, the fields beyond now obscured by gathering snowfall. The moonlight had vanished, leaving everything murky dark, He broke through the trees and stumbled over a fallen log, landing face first in the snow. More bullets whizzed overhead, joined by shouts in harsh Korean for him to stop. But Gok didn't stop. He clawed his way forward through the ditch and back to his car. One window was shot out, but none of the reckless gunfire had found its way to the tires yet. Gok scrambled to his feet and rushed around the front bumper, slinging the file in ahead of him. The motor turned over with a lazy cough, and more bullets slammed against the fender. Gok jerked the car into drive and slammed on the gas. He could see the men streaming out of the trees now. They weren't soldiers of the KPA. No, these men wore the dark uniforms of the Ministry of State Security, North Korean secret police. Muzzle flash lit the hillside as another barrage of gunfire ripped toward the car, but now the tires grabbed the busted highway and the little sedan rocketed forward. In mere seconds, the pops of the AKMs were obscured by the roar of wind ripping through the blown-out glass, and both Gok and his file faded into the night. And there you have it. That is chapter 1, and I can promise you there is a lot more action and suspense in the coming pages. So I hope you'll give it a shot, and I hope you'll let me know what you think of it. If you have already read Brink of War or First Strike, I'd greatly appreciate an honest Amazon review. It's a really big help in helping me find new readers. But yeah, this is the new book, and I hope you enjoy it. Thanks for listening.